Hello there, and welcome to the Poppycock Podcast, the final episode of the first season of the Poppycock Podcast, where the topics still don't matter, and I'm still not an expert. So, hey, don't worry, despite the change, not too much has changed. I just want to briefly thank everyone who's gone with us on this journey so far. It's been pretty wild. I'm new to audio recording and editing. In fact, I actually have a fair amount of hearing loss for being around, live ammunition and tanks firing and explosives and such. So it's actually really hard to edit things because sometimes things seem louder to me than they should be, or they are inaudible to me but very obvious to everyone else. So the people who have struggled alongside us as we figured out how to make this work, I appreciate you. Same for the people on the website. I am not a trained writer by any sense. I took a news writing class. I met a lovely lady who told me I should try writing to vent the feelings I wasn't comfortable discussing with people as I adapted to civilian life, and thus this was born out of a series of developments from then to now. So this has been kind of a huge thing, just growing as a way to sharpen my skill set to make me more employable as well as a hobby, and especially during the lockdown, it's really provided me with a little bit of a foundation of something to keep me from going insane, just something to do. I feel like even when it's not a crazy pandemic, it's just good to have goals or to have something that keeps you in a rhythm or something to aim at so that when things get crazy, it's not overwhelming and you don't feel like you're just floating aimlessly, which is something I'm quite prone to. So this is just another sort of foothold to keep me anchored when insanity comes a knocking. And it seems like he's sharing a room with me these days. So he's not even knocking anymore. He's just like using my Wi-Fi password. It's pretty wild stuff. Anyway, before we get going too much further, we are going to talk about A Cold Night in Gotham, some behind-the-scenes stuff there. Kevin Conroy is going to be here, and we're going to talk about what's going to come next, a project that was actually inspired by something. I'm going to save all that for later, and now if this was like a clickbaity website, I'd make you listen to a whole bunch of stuff and then give you like a smidgen of Kevin Conroy at the end. I'm not going to do that. You've been good, so here's a little bit from Kevin Conroy, Batman himself. Do you hear the footsteps on the roof? I can hear him. He's nearby. Who could it be? Look, over there, by the bat signal.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
Okay, now this is Kevin. Joel asked me to read that. The wonderful thing about doing this role for so long, one of the wonderful things that I never anticipated is this interaction I get to have with the audience, because the Batman fans are passionate about the character. They're so devoted to him. And I have a theory why. I think it's because of all the superheroes, he's the only one who's not a superhero. He doesn't have any superpowers. He can't fly, he can't see through walls, he can't bend metal. He's a man, he's a human being. He only has his physical strength and his intellect to serve him on his mission. He's more of a detective, really. They call him the great detective. But his mission is what's so amazing. It's to rid the world of evil, to leave the world a better place. It's such a noble cause. That's what people love about him. And they also love his tenacity. He never, ever, ever gives up. And those are qualities we can all aspire to. Because you don't have to be a superhero to want to give to your family, your friends, your community, to leave the world a better place. You don't have to be a superhero to be tenacious in your goals in life. All you have to do is care. All you have to do is want to try. And the world needs it now more than ever. My God, the virus and the lockdown and people losing their jobs and their savings and their health. And then the upheaval in the streets of our cities, hundreds of thousands of people turning out, screaming to be heard, to be seen, to be respected. There's a crisis in our community. We need each other now more than ever. To live that Batman ethic, to give, to care about each other. Because we're all we have. Life is rough. It's a rough road. It's a wonderful road, but it's hard on everybody. Everyone has challenges. Everyone has failures. I don't care how rich and powerful and successful someone is. They've had failure in their life. They've had disappointments. They've stumbled. They don't brag about it, but they have. You know they have, because they're human. And with all the randomness of life, with jobs come and go, money comes and goes, health comes and goes. You just don't know what tomorrow brings. The one stable constant that you can hang on to, that you can bank on, is the love of your family, the love of your friends. A loyal friend, that's a priceless thing. And remember, Batman has always got your back.
I'm telling you, that guy is incredible. He's sweet, he's lovely, he's polite, he's the whole shebang. I am lucky to have digitally met him, and I'm beyond fortunate that he lended me his voice for 30 seconds or so on A Cold Night in Gotham, which, for the record, was always going to end with, that was the first time Batman actually speaks. As dumb as it sounds, I'd played a lot of Destiny, and your character doesn't really speak a whole lot throughout the franchise, and so whenever the character does speak, there's a lot more, I don't know, there's a lot more gravity to the situation. You just inherently understand that, like, whoa, like, they spoke, this means a lot to them. So for Batman to do everything and watch everything happen, obviously he was probably busy during the transport segment and the shootings and such, but for him to show up at the very end and actually speak and be like, oh no, and actually show worry, that's supposed to show the gravity of the situation we've now found ourselves in. Anyway, so A Cold Night in Gotham is called that because I didn't want it to be called Batman, A Cold Night in Gotham, or Joker, A Cold Night in Gotham. Gotham is itself the character of this story, and the characters within it, the very low-level characters, because I cannot write a better Batman story right now than some of the people who've been writing Batman for years, but I might be okay at writing a story from the ground looking up. Mark and Janice Hamilton are the initial people who are the victims that are found in that home. They're found at 4th and DiMaggio, which is a reference to the voice of Marcus Phoenix, usually, who was the voice of the Joker, whose last name was DiMaggio, and he was the Joker in Under the Red Hood, which is a fairly celebrated and loved animated adaptation. It's pretty darn good. Jensen Ackles is in there, Bruce Greenwood's in there, Neil Patrick Harris is in there. It's a good time for your ears and your eyes. So I just felt like he didn't get enough love, and I'm a Gears fan. I'm bad at it, but I'm a fan, so I figured I'd throw in a little reference to the guy. Detectives Ryan and Esposito are the first on the scene. They're played by my buddies PJ and Alejandro, where you can find on the X Button podcast, or if you look up StatX, StatX, that's them. They helped me get my start in all of this. They kind of got me into more consistent writing patterns and showed me how to do all this recording stuff and editing, and I fumbled it whenever I tried it on my own, but I wouldn't have been able to do this without them. So they're worth taking a listen to. They're a little bit more journalistic in what they do. I'm a little bit more just random thoughts and tangents for the most part, so you might actually enjoy them more. But don't ever tell me that you did. You love me. You love me first, right? You're not going to leave me. I'm kidding. Do whatever you want. But Detectives Ryan and Esposito are named, of course, after the detectives in the TV show Castle, which is, I believe, an ABC or an NBC TV show. It's no longer on anymore since then Nathan Fillion has gone on to be on The Rookie, but Nathan Fillion is in it, and he plays Richard Castle, who he's also been Green Lantern and a bunch of stuff. Stana Katic is in it, and she's been Talia al Ghul in a bunch of animated features as well as in the Arkham franchise. So while they're not DC, I consider them a DC-adjacent property just because so many things in there. Actually, the guy who plays Detective Ryan in that show went on to play Trigon in Titans. So there's another connection that I just put together. Totally forgot about that. Yeah, it's a fun show. Great crime procedural. It doesn't take itself too seriously, like these CSIs and Laws and Orders, where they're like, we stopped him. We found his sperm all over the hotel with body parts chopped up. I'm like, good God. I just got off of work or school, depending on the day. I just want to eat dinner and watch something. I don't need bodily fluids everywhere. Good God. Make me laugh. If I wanted to cry, I'd be watching the news. Boom shaka. Anyway, moving forward. There's a lot of references in it, like Soaking Up the Light in Coast City. That's a reference to the Green Lanterns. I don't remember if it's Hal Jordan or Kyle Rayner off the top of my head anymore, because I wrote this almost a year ago now. But yeah, Coast City's there. The Joker doesn't remember some of the crimes he's accused of, and that is initially seen as like a joke that he just can't remember because no one is as important as he is. but in reality, it's actually because he's not the Joker who did those crimes. And I made the Black Mask be the guy who sets out to kill him, because in Arkham Origins, Black Mask kind of gets the shaft, and I wanted to reverse that. And my brother Daniel, he's a pretty big fan of Black Mask, and so I just wanted to do him a solid, because he's been the guy who's had to listen to me bounce this stuff off my noggin for a while. But yeah, I think that's, for the most part, there's a million smaller Easter eggs within it that I just can't remember off the top of my head, and I didn't think to write down when I was preparing for this episode. Basically, I wrote it in a way that if you were a fully saturated comic book nerd, and you know every reference to every writer and artist that's ever run on any arc of DC Comics or ever performed a voice on it, then there should be something there for you that provides a deeper layer of, oh, hey, I wonder if that, and it generally is. But if you're a passive pop culture person who kind of understands stuff and just like, you're kind of busy and you watch some stuff or you read some stuff from time to time, but it's not really your thing, the story should be entertaining enough and provide enough information and twists that it's enjoyable in a vacuum, coming into it completely blind. If I was the first person to ever come up with the Batman or Joker or Gotham, this should still be something that could stand on its own 2 feet. But when you place it within the pantheon of DC characters and stories that are much greater than what I've done, it should be able to provide some type of supplementary world building to it, like how the Joker isn't dead yet. Because ultimately, the whole story just exists because my brother and I were like, he should be dead. He does a lot of dangerous stunts and pranks that rely a lot on his plan working perfectly, or on blind luck, or on Jason Todd not just murdering him, or the Suicide Squad, or Larry down the street who sells avocados at his fruit stand, and he's tired of like people freezing the city and gassing it, and they're wind-up penguins. And so when he finally sees the Joker, he's like, "This is for my friend Kathy." And he pulls out a Glock and he blows the clown away, because realistically, he's a big enough nuisance, and if you take away the death penalty, eventually someone's going to clap those white cheeks one way or another, and this is an excuse as to why maybe someone has been clapping them cheeks, and the cheeks, they clap back. So yeah, this is basically just the way I describe it. The whole story exists as I found sort of a plot hole in the tapestry of DC, which doesn't seem to have a lot of awareness of its other stories and characters. Like, things will just happen and they'll be in a vacuum, even though another character's story is being written at the same time in another comic right in the same city, and that kind of bothers me. I understand, because they're all stories being written, that they aren't real people, so they don't actually like hear the action going on in the other parts of town. But as a fan, as a consumer on the other side, I just needed some type of way to sort of fix that hole, so that whenever I look at DC, all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, but that's why. So it's also a fun way to explain why they're the cheesy, like the 60s Joker, but then also maybe like a Heath Ledger or a Mark Hamill or a Richard Epcar, who is the voice actor in all of the Injustice and Mortal Kombat stuff, and a whole bunch of other things too. And he's the Joker that I based my Joker off of. And if you liked my Joker, then he can be one of your Jokers. And if you didn't like him, you can just say, nah, he showed up and died pretty quickly. He was just a dust in the wind, and just a flash in the pan. Nothing to call home about. And that's fine, because it exists as a fan project that's supplementary if you want it, or something to laugh at if you didn't enjoy it at all. But judging by the people who've been watching it and responding to it and reacting, I'd say it's actually been a generally favorable response. So I really appreciate that. Obviously, there's no way to monetize it, so you watching it and sharing it doesn't do anything for us except for get our name out there. And that's pretty cool. I'm totally down with that, but I'm definitely not looking to make any money off of it, because I don't own these characters, I don't want to get sued, and even if they weren't going to sue me, it just doesn't feel right to try and make money off of something that, yeah, I made it, but I had a lot of the legwork of the world building done. And let me tell you, having that much done really makes playing in that world a lot easier. I have way more respect for the people who write and perform the characters that are in this pre-established universe, because it's well enough established that now you know the rules, but it's also, if you get too creative or you try too much of a new thing or you try a new take on something, the fans know what they want and they've had an example of it, and it's really hard to get someone to change what they're after. So I've said it before, I'll say it again. Anyone who steps into those roles, you are brave, and I'm going to have to go back and re-examine the versions of the characters that I didn't particularly enjoy, because I may see now from the angle of the person who's performing it it's pretty difficult. And admittedly, if I was going to try my amateur pipes at voice acting, I should have tried something other than the Joker, who's pretty much held as one of the more difficult characters to reimagine or to step into. But sometimes you are just a glutton for punishment, and also then write that character is going to do an impersonation of Bane. So you're doing a clown voice, doing a slightly Mexican, slightly Tom Hardy impersonation while you're improvising whatever the hell he's going to say. So, hey. So now let's talk about what's going to come into the future. Again, the podcast is going to continue. It's just taking a brief break. I don't want to burn out, and I have, classes I'm doing. I have stuff that's just going. It's a pandemic, and I don't want to burn out doing this. While it's something that I enjoy doing, my wife just recently got a really good schedule set up despite the insanity, and I really want to take advantage of spending time with her and being a good husband. So I don't want to just completely consume my life in this, because I'm one of those people that gets tunnel vision, and when I have something in front of me, it's the only thing that exists. So I don't want to do that. But I will give you a little hint as well, because obviously, even in the hiatus between season 1 and 2, we're still going to have plenty of stuff going up on the Poppycock website, poppycock.video.blog, where there's still going to be articles and reviews. And recently we just put out one called What If, and it's what if the Marvel Cinematic Universe wasn't launched by, at the time, what was seen as a fairly unmarketable, because their comic book sales weren't that great, Avengers platform. Because they basically had sold all the characters that had been selling well in the comics at that point to other studios, but they wanted to be able to control it more, so they started their own movie studio, and it started with Iron Man, because they basically just had the rights to these characters because no one else wanted them or knew how to adapt them. And they happened to totally strike gold, and they've done something incredible. But this is a reimagining of what in the early 2000s, instead of making these cheesy versions of the movies like the Daredevil that we got and the Ghost Rider that we got with Nick Cage, what if instead they actually kind of had this pre-planning already, and they launched it with the characters that were selling really well at the time, the Marvel Knights, which are like the edgy Shadow the Hedgehog version of all the characters you're supposed to like. So, you got like the Punisher, Ghost Rider, Elektra, Daredevil, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Moon Knight. Black Panther at the time was actually a street-level fighter. He wasn't he wasn't an Avenger at the time. He was like, he put on like a bandana with this really cool like cat mouth. And that sounds like a sexy cat girl, but it's like, like fangs and stuff, like the teeth of it, so it looks more intimidating. He doesn't look like he's a cam girl. I described that poorly initially. And he would just go out and he'd fight people, and he was like more of a street level fighter. It was very interesting. Very different from what we know now, where he's more regal. I prefer the more regal stuff, but I'm interested in this, And Blade was a big thing at the time. Tobey Maguire was just now coming as Spider-Man. That was our first big thing. Ang Lee's Hulk hadn't even come out with Eric Bana. The X-Men were still, very new in the early 2000s. So this is What If, and it's got like Keanu Reeves as Iron Fist, and Mel Gibson's in it, and Nick Cage, and Brad Pitt, and Angelina Jolie, and it's got all these different things, and it's just like a fun reimagining. And so we're gonna have stuff like that going all the time. But there is a story that I've cooked up in my head, and I don't know if I'll ever go back to it. I thought it up when I was sitting in a Bradley in the middle of a desert, sweating my butt off, and it's a story about Peter as a successful adult, and Harry comes back, and he's just giving him a hard time, and it becomes sort of like this fight, and you get to see an adult Miles Morales, adult Peter Parker, adult Harry Osborn, and it's what happens, because we never really get to see those characters grow up. So that one needs a lot more polish. So that's still on the back burner, but that's definitely one that I've been cooking for a while off and on. But the one I'm actually going to be doing first, that I'm currently on, it came from the fact that during a cold night in Gotham, initially my brother-in-law Adam, my Shanghai brother, which by the way, it's not like code for anything. We just we played Street Fighter together, and we did really well on a level that was Shanghai, and we played as really ridiculous characters. So we're Shanghai brothers. There's no racism or like a weird sex club or like a cult or anything. It's just Street Fighter on the Switch. It's like pretty mundane, actually. Anyway, he was initially going to be Batman and Gordon and a goon, and he had recorded all those lines, unfortunately with his wife and mine both making quite a bit of noise in the background, so I had to work really hard to get that audio out and bring his audio up. And then I messed with it, and then my laptop updated overnight, and I wasn't there for it, and it turned into kind of a mess, and it lost all the audio, and I only had his Gordon and his Batman, because I had made like a little clip I'd put it together first because it was so cool. And then I obviously had the chance to have Kevin Conroy, and I was like, hey man, are you okay with me replacing you with Kevin Conroy? So it reduced him from 3 roles down to 1, although he is the only character that gets to share dialogue with Kevin Conroy's Batman, which is kind of a big deal. And it's kind of like when all the music comes together, and it's like, it really, that's my favorite part of it, because it's just the journey you've just been on has been leading up to this, and it's like, whoa. And then it just stops enough it stops right there so your imagination can carry the story forward. But me and him were talking, and we were talking about characters in Marvel, because I wanted to prove that I'm not just a diehard DC fanboy. I do generally seem to lean more towards DC, but I have a soft spot for the characters that I grew up with watching on TV. So, Spider-Man, X-Men, stuff like that. And the Punisher is an interesting character, and so the story I'm working on is called Memento Mori. At least the first part. It may be a two-parter, but neither part will be as long as A Cold Night in Gotham. The first part, especially, is going to be much shorter and much more concise because he's the Punisher. He's not much for talking. He's more for shooting and fighting. And if you watch the Netflix version, growling a lot for some reason. And so it's going to be sort of a take on that character. I'm going to take into account, because I figure write what you know. And I know how to clear a room. I know how different types of weapons hold up. I know how it feels to run around in that gear, how it slides, how it moves, how it doesn't always end up the way you put it by the end of the running around. I know 3 to 5 second bursts running in between, pop up from prone with your weapon, which is a pain. I know how to clear a room. I know when to flank, when to move up, how to deflate, how vehicles work, different caliber. I've seen different people do it. And while I wasn't the most high-speed, super secret squirrel, I met a lot of people who were. And then I also, I met people who did, cool stuff. I met Special Forces people, and I got to spend a week training with them. I wasn't training to become Special Forces. I was just teaching them how to talk to normal people because they're so much cooler than regular soldiers. They have to dumb themselves down to our level. That's how hardcore they are. But along the way, you do see how they do things, and you get to learn some things, and you get to watch them, and they are the coolest people you will ever meet, and genuinely nice people. At least the group we met. We didn't get their names because we're not allowed to take photos up with them or talk about it, because where they were going, even we weren't allowed to know, which is so cool. Whatever. The Punisher actually has a big impact on enlisted and officers as well. Probably officers. I don't know. There's this whole dynamic between enlisted and officers that there's a lot to go off of. And while I was in the Army and not the Marines, unlike Frank Castle has been more often than not, he's sometimes been other things, but more often than not, he's a Marine. Originally Vietnam veteran, and then a Gulf War veteran, and then it keeps slowly shifting upwards and like a sliding scale of where everyone their age is, because they don't want any characters to get too old. It's kind of annoying. The comics don't just let people live a life and die or retire, and then new characters show up, and then if you've run for a year or two of new characters, people don't like it, then you reboot the universe. They always reboot right after they finish telling all the good stories, and then they just restart telling those same stories all over again. I don't need to read that. I already know it. I know what happens. Do something new. Whatever. It's neither here nor there. It doesn't matter. But there's just this dynamic with enlisted people about how they feel about the Punisher. And while I wasn't a Marine, I was a grunt. And I worked with other people from other branches, both during and after my time, who, they served in the National Guard and Marines, Navy, Air Force, you name it, and all these different MOSs or jobs within those branches. So I've got quite the woven tapestry of stories and personalities to draw from. And I have my own platoon, a lot of my buddies, they were at my wedding, that I can draw from for tactical ideas. I'm like, okay, well, what would you use? And I can draw from all of them, and then I have multiple choice of okay, well, what type of caliber would he use? What type of attachment would he use? How would he enter this room? And so I have this brain trust of tactical knowledge that I can just draw from, and it's really neat, and it's a really cool byproduct of time and service that I never would have anticipated. And when you're in it, you can go to just about any group, especially infantry or grunts in any department. And somewhere within a unit, you will find a Punisher patch, either a sticker or a patch that's either on body armor, on a bag, on a rucksack, body, it's maybe a tattoo, maybe it's, it's a sticker on some of their, carrying cases and stuff, what have you. it's there because the idea that you've become quite acquainted with the concept of your own mortality. So the idea that someone could face death, come back from it, and then find vengeance against the people who've done wrong, who punishes the people who would normally get away, that's a dream come true. That's a mythical like story that if we were still like cavemen or what have you, that would be like the myth that people tell, that soldiers would tell each other. I'm surprised that that wasn't a myth initially within like Roman soldiers and stuff. It sounds like something that you would hear cooked up from that. It's a very cool story. But whenever you get out, you begin to realize that the rage and the aggression and the violence and the sort of destructive nature of the Punisher is actually not very good to emulate. And then whenever you get out as a civilian, it's really not good to emulate because there's just not a lot of situations where that's legal even to do. Because you can kind of throw each other around. At least you could at our unit, which was kind of a trash unit. If people have issues, they would just let people kind of fight it out sometimes and just get it out of their system and then get on to both of them for what they just did because they're all adults and they're both going to get in trouble. I've seen guys get their nose broken. I've seen guys get like knees displaced, all kinds of stuff, a lot of bruises and cuts and all kinds of stuff. It's not something you should emulate afterwards. And there's a negative stigma with like the PTSD. A lot of it is like, oh, Frank never recovered from what happened, and so now he kills people. Which is I feel like it's an oversimplification of what his story should be, of what his character should be. He's like not just some suicidal nutcase who never properly adapted, which sets a really negative stigma for pop culture fans who are reading this, who then interact with interact with veterans, because then they assume that we're all just as broken and that we're all going to go kill crime families or something. And generally, we just like post memes on Facebook and complain about our broken body parts and like drink. So I want to do a version of the Punisher that is like the DNA of what has made him who he is, tied in with like realistic portrayals of someone who was in and then got out and went through these things and dealt with these things, and what would the real logic behind this be, where it isn't just blind rage and anger that drives him to continuously punish people. And so it's drawing a lot of stuff from real life people I've met, real life stories, some comic book arcs that I find interesting, and like a TV show like Burn Notice, which I've said before is a huge influence on me. It started whenever I was transitioning from middle school to high school, and pretty much set the stage for what cool was, because the internet wasn't nearly as effective as it used to be. So we were still in the slider phone life, and so you weren't just streaming TV shows and stuff. So I would just wait for that day of the week when a new episode would come on and be like, whoa, that's so cool. So that's part of it. It's not going to be relentlessly dark, because something you learn in the military is there's a really dark humor, like a gallows humor, where you've come to terms with your horrible situation of sweating your nuts off for oil that you'll never get money from because some senator told you that you need to, and now it's come down the chain of command, and as far as you're concerned it's for freedom, but in reality it's for gas prices or whatever. Let's not get into that. So there's just, people kind of assume that when you're in the military that you're just like, I want to kill, and there's definitely like as soon as there's any type of pressure kickback, you immediately respond with the utmost violence. And I think that while the Punisher TV show dealt with that kind of well, that he isn't very well adjusted, it was definitely a different take on the Punisher than what I had initially read. Ray Stevenson, I think, really looked like the Punisher, was just in a bad movie, and Thomas Jane, I think, nailed the voice and like the way he carries himself, and I'm gonna go ahead and say it, his guns, pretty good. I don't just mean like the farms, I mean like his biceps and shoulders. Nice work. It's another weird movie. And the comic books have been super inconsistent even from like the 2000s forward, and the artwork in it is usually kind of ugly. There was a run called Punisher Black and White right before Secret Wars reset Marvel that was pretty interesting, but it went from making the Punisher, he was almost like a Hollywood hipster, but he was like a normal guy. He looked like a normal person, which was nice, who just had tactical know-how and even had these moments of almost happiness and levity, just in a dark way. I describe it like after you've just had a breakup, where you can still go and see a movie that makes you happy, or go to the fair, or do something fun, and you still feel joy and happiness. It feels like you can't ever quite be as complete or as happy as you used to be. And that's sort of the direction I'm coming at with how Frank interacts with things. And I'm not just going to say he's a broken man with bad PTSD. I want to add more layers to that. I already know like his inner creed and like why he's doing things. And that comic book, unfortunately, also around volume 2, it went for 3 volumes before the reset. He turns into like a Superman-sized giant of just raging muscle, like a Gears of War Marcus Phoenix face, which works because I always imagine the Punisher sounding something like Jeffrey Dean Morgan or Marcus Phoenix or Ron Perlman. Those are sort of like the areas I see like the voice coming from. It's okay that he looks that way, but he becomes almost like a Judge Dredd fascist monster of like he sees someone who turned his life around who's a criminal and he still hates them and thinks they're scum when in reality no one should feel that way, especially someone who is himself committing countless crimes and is proof that the things you've done won't always define you if you choose to, and you can turn that pain into something good. It was just weird in one note, and it didn't feel like a. I get that he's an anti-hero, but just like Judge Dredd is kind of a villain that you're rooting for, he's just a better villain. He's a more likable and a better evil than the evil that he fights. I didn't want this guy to be that. I want him to be, unlikable in some respects because I worked with plenty of people that were unlikable. But I don't want the reader to hate him. And I kind of found myself hating that run for like a brief period of time. So it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out. And in order to improve myself, I am actually taking master classes, which may be just a gimmick that costs me money. But I'm doing the one by Neil Gaiman about storytelling and writing for books and comic books as well, because I would love to either become a good enough artist one day or hire an artist who is good enough to turn A Cold Night in Gotham and also this Memento Mori Punisher story into comic books that obviously would be free because I don't own the characters. So it would just be a fan project. But yeah, so that's just sort of what's cooking up, what's coming next. It's not going to be like a consistent thing. This may be the last audio story that ever happens, or it may just be written and it may never become like an audio drama. But it's something else that I'm working on. It's something I want to learn. I still remember being in high school and going to Mrs. Gross Nichols' history class and reading about a Renaissance man who he was a swordsman and he could ride a horse and he could cook and he could write and sing and dance and he could do everything. He wasn't just a jack of all trades and master of none. He was a jack of all trades and master of at least a handful. And I've tried my hand at multiple things and I know some of the things I suck at. And I'd like to get better at writing and voice acting and character stuff and writing in the correct tense and choosing the right dialogue and making it feel snappy and quick when it needs to and the pacing of it all. So they say you shouldn't discuss your goals before you've achieved them because it releases a smaller dose of the same chemical compound that releases whenever you feel a sense of completion and pride and accomplishment. And if you tell enough people, you start to feel like you've already done it and it makes it even easier not to follow through. However, my writing would still be garbage and my voice acting would still be garbage if I don't finish this stuff. And I already paid money for it, so I'm definitely going to finish it. But I also see it as people are now, I just have an entire internet to hold me accountable. And it's sort of a mixture. I want to improve myself, but I also want to offer a more enjoyable and a higher quality amount of enjoyment for the people that are listening, for the loyal fans who are listening and reading all the stuff we do. I really appreciate that. So you can thank Adam for being the initial Batman, who did a darn good job, and I may release his version of Batman eventually. Then again, I'm not sure I would want my version of Batman ever released, because A, mine would be worse than his, and B, we've now heard Kevin Conroy say those lines, and that's intimidating. I definitely would never have been the Joker if Mark Hamill or Epcar had stepped up and been like, "Oh, I'll do it." Then I won't ever again even say the word Joker. But yeah, however, Adam, if you're listening to this, and I know you are, Spider-Man Far From Home never should have been made. I'm just going to say it again, okay? It's a stupid question. Who's going to be the next Iron Man now that Tony's dead? The guy who already has multiple Iron Man suits, who is a decorated, general in the Air Force, and who is an adult. Rhodey, War Machine. The guy who's already an Avenger and can file his taxes and is done with puberty and won't hand glasses off to some dude he met 2 weeks ago just because he's roguishly handsome. Ugh. Come on. I understand your perspective. Spider-Man, the story of him dealing with the loss of a loved one, that's a story worth telling. Spider-Man trying to figure out where he fits in the Avengers, that's worth telling. Will he be the next Tony Stark, an inventor? Maybe, very possibly, especially if they don't, push the X-Men or Fantastic Four's Reed Richards into the mix anytime soon. There's a very good chance he could be the next Tony Stark of the MCU. But He will never be the next Iron Man. He might be the third Iron Man after, Rhodey is retired because he gets old, because he's already an adult who's flown combat missions and was one of Tony's closest friends even when he was a garbage person. He was friends with Tony back when he was still Terrence Howard, okay? I understand that there aren't a lot of War Machine fans, unlike me, so it doesn't make sense to make movies about him as a solo feature, but it's a dumb premise for a movie. Euro trip with Peter Parker is already kind of a tough pill to swallow. Acting like even Skrull version of Nick Fury wouldn't be like, oh, yeah, we already have an Iron Man. Why is this a problem? And then Happy would be like, oh yeah, he helped me contain Tony at his worst, and he was at his funeral, and he's someone I can depend on. We talk because we're all helping take care of Morgan, his daughter, who we all love, who got no references. And it doesn't matter. That movie is a garbage fire, and I don't like it. That being said, visually very cool, and I really like some scenes in it. I really think the performances are pretty good. But the whole story premise and the script was pretty much just stupid. A prostitution joke in a children's movie about superheroes. The hell is wrong with you? Anyway, that's fine. Thanks for listening. This has been the Poppycock Podcast. This has been Season 1. That was Kevin Conroy. You've been great fans, and that is all. Woo! See you in Season 2, baby!
Hey, buddy. Didn't expect to see you here.
Look, it's me. I'm here. Deal with it. Let's move on.